myself situated here. All right. So starting now with our 8th lesson in the book of Joshua that we've been going over with now. I know we've been hit and miss here a little bit the last few weeks with all the crazy weather that we've had. But we are on the 9th chapter now of the book of Joshua. And we're going to be looking at now the title for this one, whenever Chad gets her pulled up there, is called Israel's Wily Enemy. And this lesson wanted me to pull a YouTube video up of the Wile E. Coyote, right? But I figured we all were pretty well versed in who Wile E. Coyote is. And he always, after the Roadrunner, right? Back when cartoons were still good and entertaining, maybe a little extra violent at times too, right? But that was okay. And we can probably think, right, of all the different ways. Maybe you can kind of even see some of those in your head or hear the meep meep from the Roadrunner, right? Of all the different ways in which Wile E. Coyote was always trying to get him, right? Always trying to capture the Roadrunner, always trying to kill him, right, or get a hold of him, and it always worked out that Wile E. Coyote ended up the one that was essentially falling into the trap, right, that he had set for the Roadrunner. And why was he never successful in catching the Roadrunner? Why was Wile E. Coyote never successful in catching the Roadrunner? What would always happen? The Roadrunner was either what? Either too fast or too smart, right? Always, right? He was always either too fast or too smart, and just simply could not catch up. It didn't matter how wily the coyote got, right? Or how elaborate the plan was, or how intelligent it seemed. The Roadrunner always managed to foil the plan. And what we're going to see through this chapter, and as we move through this lesson here, that Israel's enemies were using or trying to use some wiliness as a weapon against them. Okay. Problem was, unlike though Wile E. Coyote, right, the Israelites, they got caught in a trap, right? They managed to be fooled successfully. So we're going to look here at what could have prevented Israel, obviously, from being fooled. Now, Joshua 9 is quite the contrast from the previous 8 chapters of the book of Joshua. There is a complete lack of communication that happens between God and Israel, and in the absence of this communication with the Lord, kind of helps us understand the point of why this is in here. Okay, Joshua as well through this learns that his own human wisdom and knowledge, right, his ways of processing information and trying to come up with a good decision, that's not enough to lead the people of Israel. God's offering wisdom to Joshua. He needed to ask for it because Joshua and the rest of Israel were acting on their own. And it eventually leads to a grave mistake here that proved both costly and embarrassing. Chad, did I not send that to you? I must not click the share button. Hang on. Alright, you should have it now. I forgot to click the share. All right, so let's look here at the first 6 verses of chapter 9. And we're going to see, first of all, the Canaanites here and the way in which they are strategizing to survive. Okay? Now, word was spreading throughout Canaan that the Israelites were there, right? And that their God was giving them the land. So they were obviously worried and looking for ways to keep this from happening. Okay? trying to protect their territory, what they thought was their territory in Canaan. All right, so we see some things here happening as the Canaanites are strategizing to survive. Let's look at the first 6 verses. We'll kind of start moving through this. The first 6 verses of chapter 9, and it came to pass when all the kings which were on this side Jordan, in the hills and the valleys and the coast and the great sea over Lebanon, the Hittites, the Amorites, the Canaanites, the Perizzites, the Hivites, and the Jebusites, right? Heard thereof, that they gathered themselves together to fight with Joshua and with Israel with one accord. And when the inhabitants of Gibeon heard what Joshua had done unto Jericho and to Ai, they did work wildly, right? Wildly. And went and made as if they had been ambassadors, and took old sacks upon their asses, and wine bottles old and rent and bound up, and old shoes and clouded upon their feet, and old garments upon them. And all the bread of their provision was dry and moldy. And they went to Joshua up to the camp at Gilgal, and said unto him, the men of Israel, we be come from a far country. Now therefore make ye a league with us. All right, so got the reports. Israelites are coming. Their God is allowing them to conquer. The rest of the people, the rest of the heathenites there, come up with a plan. Okay, the leaders of the strongholds here in Canaan realized that they would need a different approach than just simply warring with Israel. The warring with Israel was not going to work, so they had to come up with something else. Jericho had tried to hide behind the walls, the most powerful walls probably in Canaan. Most famous ones for sure, didn't work, right? Ended up entombed, right, in those very walls. Ai tried to overrun Israel's army and chasing after them, and had a little success, but in the end, ended up all dead, right? They had been duped into leaving their city open for attacks as they aggressively pursued Israel. So the rest of the kings, the several kings here in the southern part of Canaan, are moving to make an alliance. We'll call it Cato, sure, right? Let's call it that. The Canaanites alliance to oppression, whatever, right? Kind of like NATO, but it's Cato here, and they're going to form a plan to get together to essentially attack Israel with as much manpower as possible, right? We get all these armies, all these people kind of alliance together. And this southern alliance we'll see in Joshua chapter 10, all right? And the next lesson here kind of talks about the battle that happens. But for now, this is just the beginning. This is just they're talking about this, right? This is the C7 summit that they're having to come together to figure out what's the best plan of action here, because they knew they can't do it individually with the Israelites, all right? So what would you, before we, of course, just kind of surface value, right? Obviously we know the story of Joshua, the book here very well, but what would you predict was going to happen to the combined brute force here of the southern alliance of these kings? Just based on previous information, what do you think was probably going to happen to this southern coalition? Right, it makes sense, right? Because everything up to this point has been wiped out. So it would make sense here that, realistically, think about it, God allowing all these nations to come against him. A good way to get rid of all of them very quickly. And that's kind of what you would think would happen, okay? What do you, at this point, how would you describe their plan? And we're talking the alliance here, the Cato alliance. How would you describe their plan of getting everybody together and trying to figure out a way? How would you describe this plan? Right now, just face value, where we're at, how would you describe this? Or how would you explain this? What word would you use to describe it? Nobody has any words? I'll have one. Dumb. All right, this is dumb. I shouldn't do this. Because Those big, huge walls in Jericho weren't going to happen. Well, that's going to fix stuff. Us getting there, it's probably not going to work either, right? This is a futile opportunity, chance here to save themselves, right? Just at face value, knowing what we know, that's how we should probably kind of describe this and figure this out. So we have this coalition power strategy. We then get to verses 3 through 6, and we see Gibeon's psychological strategy as well. So the Gibeonites had a very different way or strategy for survival, right? They didn't even think that a united force is going to work and stop Israel. They believed, so the Gibeonites believed that Israel's God could not be beat with a sword, all right? If you will just jump over to verse 24 of chapter 9, it should be close there. This is the Gibeonites talking, and they answered Joshua and said, because it was certainly told thy servants how that the Lord thy God commanded his servant to give you all the land and to destroy all the inhabitants of the land from before you. Therefore we were sore afraid of our lives because of you and have done this thing. So the Gibeonites, they already were expecting to lose. But rather than turning to repentance to God, which would have maybe curtailed God's judgment on them, what they did is they come up with plan in verse 4 of chapter 9. All right, so verse 3, and the inhabitants of Gibeon, this is who we're talking about, this is the Gibeonites, heard what happened at Jericho, heard what happened at Ai. Verse 4, so they did work wildly and went and made as if they had been ambassadors, took the old sacks on their asses, wine bottles old and rent and bound up. So they were not going to face the Israelites with military force. They were going to try to deceive them. Work smarter here, not harder, right? This is what this is, okay? And for me, just as a person reading this, to give you nice, hey, this makes sense. Let's try it, right? We're not going to be able to fight with a sword. Let's see if we can outsmart them, okay? It makes sense that they would try to do this. So, they practiced to deceive, pretending to be ambassadors from a faraway country, maybe trying to appeal to the pride of Israel in some way. Now, apparently, right, the Gibeonites were shrewd enough to learn the details of Israel's laws. They knew that trying to come to Israel in a diplomatic agreement, right? Coming up with this diplomatic agreement, it would, with Israel, is going to result in for Israel, they weren't allowed to make these treaties, right? Over in Exodus 23, and we don't really flip over there to kind of look at that, but the Israelites were not allowed to make treaties with anybody living in Canaan, right? So they were trying to come up with the method agreement here is essentially, maybe not the best plan, but it makes sense, right? So the Gibeonites pretended to be a foreign people, right? Not the Canaanites. Pretty smart what's happening here. From a far away, long way land. That's why they dressed themselves like they had traveled for a very long distance. Because they knew they couldn't be a Canaanite a people. They also must have known the Israelites thought enough of their God to honor any treaty made in his name, right? Because in reality it was God who held Israel to the covenants that they made with other people. So pretty intelligent here what they're trying to do. When King Saul broke the treaty that Israel eventually made with Gibeon, God sent a famine to punish Israel, right? And it wasn't until King David stepped in and made the amends with the Gibeonites, right, that God lifted the famine. And in the end, Saul's actions cost 7 of his sons their lives. You can see that in 2 Samuel. So with the possibility here of getting a treaty with Israel in mind, the Gibeonites are preparing this delegation of pretend ambassadors who look like they're pretty well war-torn and travel exhausted, that coming from a pretty far away place, right? Verse 4 and 5, again, we see the ways in which they were clothing themselves. Verse 5, specifically old shoes on their feet, old garments. They even molded the bread, right? Molded the bread and the cheese and makes like it had been a long time traveling. Kind of over the top, made themselves to look aged and travel torn. Unless conditions were extremely harsh, it would take a long journey for wineskins to deteriorate to the point that they needed patched up. Okay, and it would take a long time for sandals to get to the point to where somebody needed to repair them, right? The conditions were bad. Obviously, it's going to wear stuff down quickly, but if they weren't, it's going to take a long journey to do this, all right? The Gibeonites obviously knew what they needed to do to portray as being traveling for a long time, right? They purposely made it appear they come from a distant place. So their thinking must have been that the longer that they appeared to have traveled, the more likely that Joshua and the leaders there in Israel is going to believe this story. And think more quickly, come up with a quicker result here to this treaty with them. Right? Also, probably the thought here that the farther that it appeared that the men had traveled, the more flattered the people of the leaders of Israel would be by this unexpected appearance of these people. Their conquest, the Israelites' conquest, is just beginning. To have this group of men show up as soon as, at Israel's camp, all tattered and worn from a long journey, to want to have this treaty with Israel, right? Because they know Israel's conquering stuff, right? So stroke the ego a little bit. Because Israelites aren't going to think people are going to want to come join alliance with them. They don't think that's going to happen. So human nature responds to positive strokes of the ego. Many a person has been duped into bad decisions by a flattering tongue. Proverbs 29:5. Right, let's flip over and look at that one. Proverbs 29 and verse 5, and let's look at what it has to say. Might be able to quote that one to me, but let's go look at it. Well, if I can get there. A man that flattereth his neighbor spreadeth a net for his feet. Right? Reword that for me in your own words. A man that flattereth his neighbor spreadeth a net for his feet. So put that into Appalachian for me, somebody. Nobody?
On your neighbor makes him stumble.
Say it again.
Bragging on your neighbor makes him stumble.
Purposely bragging on the neighbor to cause them to stumble, right? That's it, right? It's okay to tell somebody that they're doing a good job when they're doing a good job, right? But using it clandestinely, right? Using it in a way that's a little bit evil, right? Just to try to get an advantage. That's what's going on here. So the Gibeonites essentially are attacking the minds of the Israelites. That's what's happening, right? They're attacking their minds. They wanted them to believe the story about traveling across the globe just to see them. They knew they couldn't be taken over by force, so they surmised the only hope was to trick them into thinking they wanted to be their servants, and it had come a long way to tell them that. From God's perspective here, the Gibeonites gave the Israel leaders an opportunity to grab some of the glory that belonged to him alone. And of course, he had a lot to say about that if they simply would have just asked. How would you feel if a haggard bunch of worn-out people showed up at your door at the house and told you that they had traveled a great distance because they heard how wonderful you were? Right? They showed up at your house. Hey, we've been a long ways. We've heard about how wonderful you were. How would you feel about that? I can tell you what would happen at our house. Haley would say, come right on in. How can I help you? And I would say, go somewhere else. Right? Because that's just how we see those types of people. Right? Somebody needs some money. Haley says, I wish I had something to give. And I say, those people need to go get a job. Right? That's just the way we're made. So how would you feel, though, if these people showed up, right, at your house? What would you do? So the Gibeonite ambassadors arrived in Gilgal after their really long, tedious 25-mile journey. That's all it took to get down there. And promptly asked here Joshua to make this covenant with them. That treaty was the whole reason that they were there. Cut right to the chase, asked for the treaty, was also kind of part of the mind games here that the Gibeonites are playing with the Israelites. What a feather in their cap to have a distant people be so fearful of them that they wanted to get a treaty with them as quickly as possible, right before they dominated the whole world. Right? That's what's going on here. Verse 6, right? They went to Joshua unto the camp in Gilgal and said unto him, to the men of Israel, we be come from a far country. Now for there make ye a league with us. That's the plan, right? All right, go ahead, Chad. So that's what's going on. We see now, starting in verse number 7, is that the Israelite leaders are playing detective here. Okay, playing detective. Verse number 7, let's start there and read down to verse 13. And the men of Israel said unto the Hivites, peradventure ye dwell among us, and how shall we make a league with you? And they said unto Joshua, we are thy servants. And Joshua said unto them, who are ye, and from whence come ye? And they said unto him, from a very far country. Thy servants are come because of the same of the Lord thy God, for we have heard the fame of him in all that he did in Egypt, and all that he did to the two kings of the Amorites beyond Jordan, Sihon king of Heshbon and the Og king of Bashan, which was at Ashtaroth. Wherefore our elders and all the inhabitants of our country spake to us, saying, take victuals with you for the journey, and go to meet them, and say unto them, we are your servants, now therefore make ye a league with us. This is our bread we took hot from our provisions out of our house unto the day we came forth to go unto you, but now behold it's dry and moldy. And these bottles of wine which were filled were new, and behold they be rent, and these our garments, our shoes are become old by reasons of the very long journey. Right? So immediately we see at least a little bit of immediate suspicion from the Israelites. They're suspicious of the Gibeonites, all right? They smelled a rat. Just something didn't feel right. So they questioned the ambassadors immediately about their origin, stating that they aren't allowed to make covenant with anybody from Canaan. That's what I'm saying in verse 7. The individual said to them, Hivites, peradventure, ye dwell among us, and how shall we make league with you? We can't do it. So you have to commend, at least initially here, the Israelite leaders for being pretty perceptive of what's going on, right? There's obviously something that was just off about the Gibeonites, that they didn't really look like they traveled as far as they were saying that they had traveled. But the Gibeonites just totally ignore the question in verse 7. They say, how can we make this alliance with you? And they just ignore it, right? They just ignore it and simply tell Joshua that they wanted to be their servants, verse 8, right? So don't answer the question. divert to something else. That's what they do here, right? And they said unto Joshua, we are thy servants. So they don't answer anything. They just said they wanted to be there to help. So the questions about their origin obviously made the Gibeonites uneasy. So they didn't want to answer the questions. Maybe they were really bad liars. Maybe they kind of realized that the plan here was probably very easily sawn through under some initial just questioning. So they just kind of leave the topic of their origins, just try to go somewhere else, right? And steer the conversation somewhere else. A good politician here, right? Don't want to answer the question because I don't want to incriminate myself, so let's move the direction of the conversation somewhere else. So we see Joshua, verse 8, in turn, kind of ignoring their request to be their servants. And they said unto Joshua, thy servants. And Joshua said unto them, who are you, and where'd you come from? Right? Where come from ye hence? Or where hence come ye? Sorry. So Joshua's being prudent. The stranger's origin was key piece of information that they needed because he needed to be certain that these people weren't Canaanites, right? Because the covenant very specifically states they can't make alliance with the Canaanite people. And obviously this is in the back of Joshua's mind, right? Knowing the parameters of that are in the back of his mind. The problem, though, is that what do we not see Joshua doing? Never, right? We don't see that. We got some guys showing up, a little bit suspicious, smells maybe like a rat, and we don't see Joshua going, hold on just a second, let me ask the guy let me ask the one who I know knows for sure if these people are true or not. We don't see that happening. Joshua is using his own wisdom here, thinking that he has the ability to decipher through if this being deceitful or not. The ambassadors here from the Gibeonites wouldn't be able to wriggle off the hook here. They had to present their case that they had indeed traveled from a long way, right? So that's what we see there in verses 9 and 10, right? If we've heard all the things that the Lord has done in Israel and the king there in Sihon and the Og and Ashtaroth, right? We heard what has happened, so our elders told us to come to you. And look at our shoes, and look at our clothes, and look at our wine bags, and look at our food. It's been a long time to get to you. So they are using verses 12 and 13 to try and give evidence for their long travel. What would have been the easiest way for them to convince Joshua that they were from somewhere far away? Tell them where they were from, right? We are from, but they didn't do that. So, put yourself in Joshua's shoes here, and we're going to stop right here because I don't want to run through the rest of this because I don't quite have the time. But put yourself in Joshua's shoes right here, and what would your reaction be to the Gibeonites as they're trying to stack up this evidence for a long travel?
I might be tempted to say if you're from that far away, you might not even have a problem.
Okay.
Right? If you're not from right here, then why are you even here?
But that was all right. Perfect. Why do you? We're not conquering you all. Why do you care? Right? That's a very good question that probably could have asked. What are some other things though? Is maybe that they are, as the evidence is kind of stacking up from traveling from far. Had they done good things to make it look like they were a long ways away? Yes. The plan was pretty good. Realistically, right? The plan was pretty good. It just had some holes in it, as most deceitful plans do. What are some other things maybe that raise your suspicions, other than what Miranda said? Like, why do you? If you're from so far away, why do you care? We're not conquering your land. What are maybe some other? Is there anything else that raises your suspicions?
Well, they won't clearly say where.
Right. Yeah, I think that would have been the first red flag for me. Like if you had taken the time and your leaders had told you that the Israelites are conquering Canaan. But we're not from Canaan. We're from somewhere that's really far away. But we just want to come be your servants. We want to travel all this way to get there because we want to attach ourselves to you because you're conquering Canaan. Where are you from? Right? I mean, I think that's a pretty suspicious thing. They should have at least maybe lied about it. They went this far. They might as well have thought of a country somewhere and lied about it. Right? They should have at least. If you're going to go, might as well go all in. Don't just dip your toes in the water here. But that's not what they did, so we see some of the suspicions, all right? We're going to get into this part next week, but verses 14 and 15, Joshua, we see, makes a decision. And what we know is that Joshua does not do what while he makes his decision? Doesn't ask God, right? If he had been concerned now about the rat, he should have went to God and asked if there was indeed a rat. We now are going to see Joshua in consecutive scenes or consecutive things that have happened in which he has made decisions that were poor and that were not that he had not went to God first. Okay, it's not like it happened when things were fine. It's just back-to-back decisions now in the book of Joshua, which he has not been very good at being the leader that God wanted him to be. And that's kind of what we'll see and move through next week as well. And then we see them kind of scrambling back towards the end of this to trying to save face. And there's some other things that happen here as well that we'll kind of get into. But we'll save that for next week. Let's pray. Heavenly Father, thank you again for a time to come together, for this story, or for this lesson here for us in Joshua, and being able to see what decisions were made and how the importance for Joshua, the Israelites, for us as well. That we know that you're going to keep your end of what you say that you're going to do, and it's important for us to remain faithful in serving you. And even if we think we maybe have a good clue or idea on how to attack a situation or a problem, where it's important for us to remember that we always need to go to you first because you're the one that knows everything anyways. So I pray this is kind of a reinforcement for us as we move through this lesson to see the importance of service to you. Lord, Pastor Rob here as he comes as well in the next hour to we'll be attentive to the word that you have for us to him as we pray. Amen.